guys, welcome to the course. And so firstly, obviously we're going to have to download Blender 3D, and so for that you're just going to go to blender.org, or you can just simply search Blender on the internet and then it's going to come up, blender.org. Go to this website and just download the latest Blender version. Right now it's 3.6, so I'm just going to click download and then it's going to start downloading. Now I already have it downloading down there, so I'm just going to cancel this new download, or if your screen looks like this, just click download and then it's going to take you to that website. Now this is for people who have good computers. Your computer has a graphic card and your CPU is good, and mainly your graphic card is good, right? At least an NVIDIA 20 series graphic card, or maybe a 1650 at least, right? If you don't have that, if you have integrated graphics, or if you have a lower end PC, what you can do is you can simply search for Blender.2.81. Just search that and go to this website. Now this version does have a little some fewer features. It doesn't have geometry nodes, and I think that's pretty much it. That's mainly that's the only major thing that it's lacking. But everything else is pretty much the same, and it renders faster. It's generally a little faster on slower PCs. So you don't have to click this, because if you do, it's going to take you to that same website, Blender 3.6. That's not what we're trying to download. You're going to click this thing right here, Blender 2.83 LTS, long-term support, and then just click this button right here, go down and just click, if you have Mac OS, then click Mac OS. If you have Linux, click Linux, but I'm going to click on Windows because I have Windows, right? So it's going to start downloading. I'm not going to download that again because I already do have this downloading. So I'll see when this has completed downloading, and then we will start with Blender. Now the reason why I'm downloading a fresh copy of Blender, even though I have it already, is because I have a lot of add-ons installed, and so I want to sort of show you guys how to install those add-ons first and how to sort of set up your Blender, right? Otherwise it's just going to be everything is set up in my own Blender, right? So that's not and that's not going to be that might be a little confusing for you guys. But yeah, while this is downloading, you can also go ahead and download the BlenderKit add-on. Just search for BlenderKit. This is an add-on which we're going to be using, so just search for it on the internet. Just go to this first link right here. Don't click on the sponsored links. A lot of the times now, right now I think it's probably the genuine website. However, a lot of times what happens is that sponsored links are scams. I don't know why that is, but it is what it is, unfortunately. So just go to blenderkit.com and click download BlenderKit, and then just click download right here, and it's going to download as a zip file. And it's also showing you instructions on how to install it, but we're going to be doing that together. So just click download right here, and I will see you when these add-ons have completed installing. All right, so now Blender has been downloaded, so I'm just going to be opening this, and the installer should look the same regardless of the version that you download, but we're going to be installing Blender 3.6. Right, so just click next and then accept the license agreement. And I'm just going to be clicking next because I have my SSD in C drive. So it is generally recommended to just download Blender if you have an SSD in that SSD, because it's obviously going to be faster. So I'm just going to do next, install, and yeah, it's just as straightforward as that. Yeah, there's really not much to it, to be honest. I'm just going to wait for it to complete installing, and I'll see you then. All right, so Blender has been installed. Just click finish. Let's go to our start menu, and it should come up here, but it does not for some reason. So I'm just going to be opening Blender 3.6. And so when you open Blender for the first time, it's going to look something like this, right? So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to set the language to English, obviously, and the shortcuts, just set it to Blender. And yeah, everything seems to be nice. Just save new settings, and now it's going to, something like this is going to pop up. So generally what I'd like to do is I'd just like to click off it, and it's just going to, sort of that menu is just going to open, just going to close, right? I'm going to be showing you around the basics of the UI of Blender. So firstly, this thing right here, this whole thing right here is called the viewport, right? And this thing down here is called the timeline. You can go forward in timeline, in the timeline, or backwards. This is especially useful when you're making animations, because obviously you're gonna have to have a timeline if you're making animations, right? That's basically the same in every other software, every other animation software, right? Right here you have this thing which is called the outliner. So basically this outliner right here, the job of this outliner here is to sort of essentially just show all the objects that you have in your scene right now. So we have a camera, this is the camera, we have this cube right here, this is the cube, and then we have this light, this is the light right there, right? So you basically have everything which you have in your scene in this outliner. This is just so that you can organize your things and you can select the things which you have in your scene, right? And down here, we have this whole menu. This whole menu is essentially comprised of a lot of things, right, which you can sort of tweak. This is the render settings, this is the output settings, this is the world settings, this is the light settings, and basically you have a lot of settings. We're going to dive deep into these later on. Right now, these might seem a little confusing, but just don't worry about that. Okay, so let's just start with how to sort of move your camera, right? Also, these right here are basically your movement tools, right? This is the move tool, this is the rotate tool, the scale tool, and the transform tool. This comes with basically all the other settings as well, right? And this is just a select box tool, which is just used to sort of select things. I just like to use this tool when I'm working in Blender. And up here you have all the layouts which you can use for different purposes. I basically use pretty much all the time. I just use the layout mode. Sometimes I use the UV editing mode, sometimes the shading mode, and yeah, that's pretty much it. I do the animation and stuff like that in the layout viewport. However, it comes down to personal preference. If you really want to go to the animation viewport, then you can go there as well. And then geometry nodes are used. However, those are not going to be covered in this course as of yet, because they are quite advanced, and I just want this tutorial to be more focused towards beginners, right? So let's start with how to sort of move around your viewport. You can use your scroll wheel to sort of zoom in and zoom out, right? That is pretty basic. And then what you can do is you can hold your middle mouse button, and then if you hold your middle mouse button and you move your mouse, you're going to see that we can actually orbit around the object, right? Alternatively, what you can do is that if you don't have a middle mouse button, or for example, if you're on a laptop, what you can do is you can go to edit, go to preferences, and then in here, you're going to see that you can just go to input and then just click emulate 3 mouse button. Now, if I just close this out, now what's going to happen is that if I hold Alt on my keyboard, I'm holding Alt on my keyboard, by the way, and then if I left click, just use my normal left click, and then I can just do that same exact thing with this as well. I can also do it with the middle mouse button, and I can also do that same exact thing while holding Alt on my keyboard and left clicking, right? Now, one thing which I'm going to do is that I'm going to be basically installing an add-on which is going to be useful for you guys to sort of see which buttons I'm clicking, right? Because right now, if I'm pressing Alt on my keyboard, you're really not seeing that. It's going to be confusing when we move later on, right? So I'm just going to be installing that add-on. It might seem a little confusing how exactly we install an add-on, but just don't worry about that. I am going to be showing you how to install other add-ons as well later on, but right now just bear with me. So firstly, we just go to edit, preferences, and again, we go to add-ons and then just click install. And I already do have this add-on downloaded. It's basically called the Shortcut VUR Master. So I'm just going to be installing this and then just turn this on, right? So now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go and click this button right here. If you don't understand this, if you don't understand what's going on, that's completely fine. I'm just doing this so that I can show you guys which buttons I'm clicking. I'm just going to go to this add-on and click start Shortcut VUR. Now what's going to happen is that if I click my left mouse button, you're going to see it right here. I'm just going to increase my this offset so that you guys can see it more clearly. Now if I press Alt on my keyboard, you're going to see that for some reason it's not working. Okay, so the keyboard is working, however I'm not really seeing. Okay, basically what's happening is that when I press Alt on my keyboard and if I move it around, you're going to see that it's going to show it as the middle mouse button, because that's obviously Blender is obviously emulating that, right? So if I just press, let's say F3 on this on my keyboard, you're going to see that it's going to show it right here. So you guys can just rest assured that even if I don't say which button I'm pressing, you can just look down there. Okay, so that's perfectly fine. Let me just close this menu so that it doesn't confuse you guys. Right, so basically that's how you can move around your viewport. You can just orbit around your object, right? You can zoom in, zoom out, and then if you want to sort of pan, what you can do is you can hold Alt and Shift on your keyboard, and then you can move around, right? Alternatively, what you can do is you can press Shift on your keyboard and then use your middle mouse button to move around, right? So that's how you pan around your object. Now, one thing which you might be noticing is that right now we're essentially orbiting around this cube, right? What if we want to orbit around this camera? How can we do that? We can simply hold Alt on our keyboard and then press with the middle mouse button. And what's going to happen is that it's going to set our orbiting center to that exact point. That's how you can orbit around different objects. Let's say I want to orbit around that light. I just select that, press my press Alt on my keyboard and then press my middle mouse button, and it's going to set our orbit center. Similarly, with the cube, if I set it back to the cube, you're going to see that it's going to be like that. So that's how you move in Blender. It's very, very simple. There's really not much to it. You just you will need to sort of get used to these controls, especially if you're coming from another software. You are going to need some getting used to. However, once you get used to it, other controls are going to feel very, very weird. Anyways, so let's actually learn how to move these objects. And this, by the way, here is called a mesh. So whenever I say mesh, I basically mean an object, right? This is not a mesh. This is not a mesh. This, however, is a mesh, right? Because it's an actual 3D object. So if you want to move this object, what you can do is you can just simply select the object first, go to the move tool, and now you're going to see that you can just move this along all the axes that you want to move it. I am pressing Ctrl Z on my keyboard, by the way, just so that I can undo it. You can move it on the X axis. The red one, by the way, is the X axis. The green one is the Y axis, and the blue one is the Z axis. You can see these axes up here, by the way. You can even use this to move. You can just click anywhere here, and then you can just move your left mouse button, and it's gonna sort of just move you around in your viewport, right? So next, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be rotating this. So just go to the rotate tool, and again, you can rotate it in the Y axis, the X axis and the Z axis, right? And if you just click anywhere else apart from these axes, then you can just rotate it in any axis you want. However, that is generally not recommended because it really doesn't give you accurate results. It's pretty much random, so I would not recommend you to do that. Also, in your move tool, if you want to move it in two specific axes, what you can do is you can just simply click these cubes these squares right here. So if I just click this square, you're going to see that it's going to move it in the Z axis and the Y axis like that. However, the X axis is staying the same like that. And if I want to move it in the Y axis and the X axis, I can just do this, and it's as simple as that, right? Let's move on to the scale tool. So the scale tool is as simple as it sounds. You can just scale it in any axis you want, just like that, right? And so there is that. Now I'm going to be showing you shortcuts for all this. Obviously, we're not going to be using these tools because they are very slow. Using the tools is very slow. I am going to be showing you shortcuts because they are much, much faster. So for the move tool, you have a shortcut which is called G, right? So if you press the G button on your keyboard, you can just move it anywhere you want. And after that, after pressing G, if you press Y on your keyboard, it's going to lock it to the Y axis. If you press X on your keyboard, it's going to lock it to the X axis. And if you press Z on your keyboard, it's going to lock it to the Z axis. And if you left click, it's going to leave it right there. I'm going to undo this. And if you, instead of left clicking, if you press the right click button, it's going to reset it back to where it was previously, right? So that's pretty simple. I think I really hope you do understand this. It might seem a little difficult at first, and if you go to my very old tutorials, I actually used to use these tools because I thought they were much easier. However, once I sort of got used to using the G key, I think now I just can't go back, and it's much, much faster. Similarly, if you want to rotate it, you can just press R on your keyboard and it's going to rotate it like that. And if I press X, it's going to rotate it in the X axis, Y axis, and Z axis. Right click to reset it, or you can left click to just set it on that rotation. And if you want to scale it up, you can just press S, and it's going to scale it up uniformly. And if you don't want to scale it up uniformly, you can just rotate. You can just press Y on your keyboard to scale it up in the Y axis, X in the X axis, and Z in the Z axis. Right? Now, what if you want to sort of move it in, let's say, the Z axis and the Y axis? For example, you could just click here, click on this square right here, and you move it right there, right? So how exactly do you move it in two axes without having to use the move tool? What you can do is that you can press G on your keyboard, and now it's going to start moving. And now what I'm going to do is that if I want to move it in the Y axis and the X axis, for example, what I'm going to do is that the other axis remaining is called the Z axis, right? So I'm just going to press Shift and Z on my keyboard. And so what's going to happen is that it's going to move it in both the other axes except for the Z axis, right? I really hope that makes sense. I'm going to right click, and now let's press G, and let's this time press Shift X. So now it's going to rotate it, it's going to move it in the Y axis and the Z axis, but not in the X axis. So it's as simple as that. And similarly with the other things as well. So if I want to rotate it in, I don't know, the X axis and the Y axis like that. And so I'm just going to press Shift Z to do that. If I want to scale it up in the X axis and the Y axis, I'm going to press Shift Z, and it's going to scale it up like that. So it's as simple as that. So those are basically the basic movement tools. I really hope you do understand them. You can also use this transform tool if you want. This basically comes with all the options. You can move it, you can rotate it, and you can scale it up in the same tool. However, I I generally don't use it at all. I just use this. I just use the shortcuts. I think those are much faster, and you can move anything using these shortcuts as well. You can just move this camera as well. Just press G and move it around. Right click to reset it, and left click to just leave it where it is. You can move the lights as well using these controls, and it's as simple as that, right? So once you're comfortable, I would definitely recommend you to sort of get comfortable with these controls. Just practice around and just move the cube, just rotate your camera, just move it around, just sort of practice. And once you feel like you're comfortable with the movement tools, let's move on to the next thing. All right, so now let's go on to the next step, which is going to be adding objects, adding different sorts of objects and making new models from them, right? So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be just selecting all these, and I'm going to be pressing delete on my keyboard. You can also press, I think, X on your keyboard and then press OK. So that's going to delete them as well. And now you're going to see they actually disappear in our outliner, because your outliner only shows the things which are visible in your viewport, right? So I'm going to go to add up there, and in add you have a lot of these options, right? And so what we want is that we want to add a mesh, right? Remember when I told you that a cube was a mesh, right? So we're going to be adding a mesh, and then we have a lot of these options, right? You can add a cube, you can add a circle, you can add a UV sphere, and all these other options. So let's go ahead and add a cylinder, right? You're going to see that we have a cylinder in our viewport, right? You can press Alt and middle mouse button to sort of make it your center point, right? And so now what we can do is that we can actually add different objects and make random things from it. So let's go ahead and actually make like a perfume, right? So I'm just going to be deleting this. Let's go ahead and add like a cube, right? And let's go ahead and add a cylinder. And so what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be pressing S, scaling it down like that, and let's press G and Z on my keyboard so that we can move it up like that. So I think this is a basic perfume. You can obviously it doesn't look that good, but we are going to be covering modifiers and how to sort of make your things look better with modifiers later on, not right now. But yeah, also if you are noticing the fact that this cylinder is not actually smooth, it has the jagged edges. So if you don't want that, what you can do is you can right click that object and just shade it smooth. However, right now you're going to see that it looks absolutely terrible because the shading is very messed up. So what you can do is that you can just select this, right? And then what you can do is you can go down to your object data properties, go down to normals, and then just click auto smooth. Now I'm not going to explain how exactly this works, however, because it's a little too advanced. However, I just want you guys to know that you can shade your object smooth using this way. You can also increase the segments that your object has, and you can do that by simply, let me just go ahead and delete these. Instead of deleting them, what we can do is we can also hide them. So if you just go to your outliner and you just click this I button right here, you're going to see that it's going to actually hide it. Let's hide this as well. Let's go ahead and add a mesh, which is going to be a cylinder, right? So I want you guys to not click anywhere else. You're going to see this option right here, this menu. If I just click this, you're going to see that it's going to open up. Now, if you click anywhere else, this is going to disappear and there's no way to actually get it back. But yeah, you're going to see that the vertices are 32, the radius is 1 meter, the depth is 2 meters. So what you can do is you can actually increase the vertices and it's going to make it smoother, right? So if I just set it to something like 150, you're going to see now it's going to be extremely smooth, right? It's not that smooth, but you can just go ahead and make it something like 300. But do note that this is generally not recommended at all, because right now what's happening is that there are a lot of these vertices in our scene, and the more vertices you have, the slower Blender is going to become and the more time it's going to take to render, and your PC can also crash as well. So I would recommend you to just keep your vertices as low as you can and then use shade smooth to make your things look smoother. And you can also control the radius and depth. Basically, you can sort of control anything regarding the size and the location and stuff like that when you add a new object, right? So I'm just going to be deleting this because that's all I wanted to show you guys. And so we have this perfume now. And so I'm just going to be showing you how to sort of edit this shape into something which is a little better, right? So I'm going to be introducing you to the edit mode. Now, what exactly is the edit mode? Right now we're inside the object mode, right? So you can see object mode right here. Now, if I just select the cube and if I click right here and if I go to edit mode, you're going to see that we have a lot of these options right here. We're not going to be covering any of these right now, but I'm just going to go to edit mode. Now you're going to see that we have some more tools right here. Don't worry about them. They might look a little intimidating, but don't worry about that. And now what's going to happen is that we're actually going to be seeing the vertices of our object as well. And we can select vertices as well. So originally, all the vertices were selected. We can press A, by the way, to select all the vertices. However, if you click away, you're going to see that we can see all the vertices, but none of them are selected. So what we can do is we can actually select these individual vertices and we can move them around using the same exact tools, movement tools and everything else which we learned so far. So I'm just going to press G and Z. Let's move it down, something like that. And now you're going to see that we have this weird looking shape. So you can essentially just create anything in Blender, right? And so you can also go to the face select mode or the edge select mode as well. Right now we're inside the vertex select mode. I think that's what it's called. The plural of that is vertices, but the singular is vertex, not vertice. I've heard some people say vertice and it's just really weird. Anyway, so you can just go up here and you can click this button right here, which is the edge select mode. Now it's going to only select edges. So you can just select one edge, just move it right there, something like that, and cheesy. And you can even sort of move it around anywhere you want. You can basically do whatever you want with these. And yeah, so that's the edge select mode. And then you go to the face select mode and now you can select faces and you can maybe scale them down, something like that. And you can even move them around and just do whatever you want, right? So those are the tools which you can use to sort of modify your object, right? So now what I'm going to do right now, what I'm actually trying to do is that let's go out of the edit mode, back to the object mode. One way to do it is simply just click right there and go to object mode. Another way, a faster way, a shortcut for that is to just press tab on your keyboard and it's going to go back to object mode. If I press tab again, it's going to switch back to the edit mode. And if I press tab, you're going to see that we're going to come back to the object mode. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to select this cube. I'm going to press S and X, scale it down, something like that. And so I think that is a better perfume. However, I want to make some tweaks to this. So I'm just going to be selecting this. I'm going to press tab on my keyboard. Let's select the bottom face and let's actually make it smaller. Something like that. I think that is a much better perfume design. Let's get out of edit mode and now let's tweak this thing right here because the cap is way too large for now. So just scale it down, something like that, and then place it right there. So I think that is a much better perfume design. You can even sort of go back to the edit mode and just bring this up, GZ. So that's how modeling works, right? You can obviously right now we're just doing extremely basic modeling. We are gonna learn how to use modifiers and different tools and stuff like that later on. However, right now I just want to keep this very basic and we've just created this perfume bottle for us, right? So right now let's go back to the edit mode and I'm going to be showing you some tricks and some sort of basic tools which we can use to sort of model things, right? So the first one which we're going to be learning is loop cuts. Right now what's happening is that we only have the edges, the lines where the object is sort of basically changing, right? So for example, right here we have this face and then we have an edge and then we have a different face, right? However, you can add any sorts of, you can add these lines, these loop cuts anywhere you want. And the way you do that is by holding Control on your keyboard and pressing R. So if you press Control R, you're going to see that if I hover over my object, you're going to see that we're actually going to have these sort of lines across our object. So if I just press it right here, or if I just come right here, and if I just left click right here, you're going to see that now we're going to actually create a loop cut and we can actually move it along the object as well. So if I just place it something like that, somewhere like there, what's going to happen is that it's essentially going to be creating another line for us. And now what we can do is we can simply just make any adjustments which we usually would. So I'm just going to be selecting, let's select the edge mode, and let's just select the bottom edge. Let's move it forward, GZ, something like that. So you can just create something like that if you want. And I know it looks very weird, but yeah, that's what you can do. And you can even select an edge, maybe go to face select mode and just bring it forward or something like that. GX, something like that. You can do basically whatever you want, right? So that's how loop cuts work. You can add more as well if you want. So I'm just going to be adding one right there, and we can maybe add one right there as well. And then what we can do is we can select this face and GZ, just move it out in the X axis, sorry, GX, my bad, not GZ. And you have created a shape like this. Now, I don't know why you would want to do that, but yeah, you can do that, right? One thing which I'm going to show you right now is what if we sort of want to move this ahead. However, we only want this face to move ahead, nothing else. Because right now, if I just press G and X, you can see that these faces are coming along with it as well. What if I just want to extrude this out? And we have an exact command for that. You can just press E on your keyboard, and then you can bring it out. Now you're going to see that it's going to extrude out, right? So that's an option which you have as well. And yeah, so that's extrude as well. Now, if I want to sort of make this face smaller and then I want to extrude it out, what I can do is I can insert this face. Now I'm going to press I on my keyboard and I'm going to be inserting it in like that. And I can press E again to extrude it out. So those are basically the very basic modeling tools which you can use in your modeling. Now, obviously, this looks like an absolute mess, so I'm just gonna undo that. But yeah, that's what I wanted to show you guys. I just wanted to show you guys two main sort of edit mode tools which we're going to be using quite often. One of them is inset, which just sort of creates a smaller shape out of your actual shape, and the second one is extrude, which is just used by pressing E, right? And then you can, once you extrude it, by the way, you can also just right now it's locked to the Z axis, but if I press X, you're going to see that it's only going to be extruding in the X axis. If I press Y, that doesn't make sense, but yeah, it's going to be only extruding in the Y axis, and Z is Z axis as well. Right now, the only thing that makes sense is the X axis. So what you can do is you can just extrude it like that if you want. And once you've extruded it out, you can also just make any sort of adjustments that you want. So I'm just going to be bringing it down. So I think something like that should look good. If I go out of my edit mode, you're going to see that we have this sort of label which is protruding out of our perfume bottle. But yeah, that's how you can use the extrude tool and the insert tool. All right, so now you know the very basics of Blender modeling. Another thing which I'm going to be introducing to you guys is going to be the bevel tool. So basically right now you're going to see that the edges of this model are very sharp, right? The edges have no smoothing to them. They're just very sharp edges, and in real life nothing is perfectly sharp, is it? Everything is slightly smooth, right? So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to press tab to go inside of edit mode, and now what you can do is you can just basically select the edges. So you can just select this edge. Let me first go to the edge select mode, by the way. Select this edge and press shift on your keyboard to select multiple edges, and I'm going to click that. Hold shift on your keyboard, by the way, and I'm just going to be selecting all the edges which are going to be the actual edges of this bottle. And so I'm not going to be selecting the edges which are inside the bottle, so just go ahead and select them. Alternatively, what you can do is either you can basically select them individually, or you can I'm just going to be selecting them right now, and then after that let me show you another method, because right now if I do that, it's going to deselect all the edges which I've already selected, and I don't want to do that. Right, so all the edges of this, what do you call it, bottle have been selected, and now what I can do is I can press Ctrl B on my keyboard, and now you're going to see if I just move my mouse, you're going to see that it's going to make them smooth, right? However, the segments of the smoothness are not very much, right? It's just adding one more segment. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be scrolling up on my mouse scroll wheel, and as I scroll up, you're going to see that it's going to add more and more segments, right? So I can just increase it, something like that, or I can decrease it and make it very sharp, however a little smoother. So if I left click right there, you're going to see that it's going to bevel. Now you can just increase the bevel, and you can control everything from there. However, I'm just going to do it once again, and you can control the segments using the mouse scroll wheel. That's the main thing to note. I think something like that should be good. If I press tab, you're going to see that now it is smooth. However, the problem that we're facing right now is that if I go to this edge, you're going to see that the bevel isn't really looking that good, is it? It's looking very weird. And so from this side, it is more beveled as compared to this side, right? From these sides, it's less beveled, right? So what we can do to sort of fix that is I'm just going to press Ctrl Z and undo this. Let's tab out of edit mode. And so what I'm going to do is that I'm going to press Ctrl A, and usually Ctrl A selects everything in various softwares. However, in this software, in Blender, we're pressing A selects everything. Pressing Ctrl A basically opens up this menu, which is basically called the apply menu. And what you can do is you can just apply all transforms. Now, why exactly do we need to do this? I won't go into too much detail. However, you just need to do this in order to sort of make any adjustments inside of edit mode, and in order to make sure that your bevel modifier applies correctly. Now, if I just go to edit mode by pressing tab, and I'm going to make sure that all my edges are already selected. This one is not. So I'm just going to go ahead and select that. And yeah, now let's press Ctrl B. Let's increase it a little bit. And this time, if I just tab out of edit mode, you're going to see that our edges are perfectly beveled, are equally beveled from all sides. But still, we can actually see the segment. So I'm just going to right click this and shade smooth. So now you're going to see it looks very, very bad because obviously we don't have auto smooth turned on. So I'm just going to go to the normal, this option right here, this green triangle thing right here, go in normals and click auto smooth. And now you're going to see that it's going to smooth it out very well. Perfect. So that's how you smooth things out in Blender. However, now I'm going to segue into basically another thing, which is called the modifiers. Now, this is one way of beveling things, right? I just pressed tab, by the way. So this is one way of beveling things. However, if I want to sort of increase the bevel, right, how exactly am I going to increase the bevel? Because if I press Ctrl B once again, it's going to bevel it once again, and that's going to create a mess. right? We don't really want to do that. So there's basically no way, at least that I know of, to sort of bevel this more, right? So if you want to bevel it in such a way that you can control it later on, you can basically modify it later on, then you're going to have to use the bevel modifier, not the bevel tool. So I'm just going to press Ctrl Z on my keyboard a few times so that I can basically undo the bevel. And now let's go ahead and add the bevel modifier. That's going to do exactly the same thing. However, it's going to be changeable in the future, right? So I'm just going to select this object, right? And make sure that you're in object mode. It does work in edit mode as well, but just to avoid any confusions, let's stay in object mode. And with this selected, I'm going to go into this menu. And in this menu, you have a lot of these options. So I'm just going to click this thing right here, which says modifiers. It's basically a wrench. I think it's called a wrench. Anyway, so you go inside this modifier menu, and then you click this button right here, which says add modifier. And now you have a lot of these modifiers, right? And all these modifiers, essentially what they do is that they change your mesh in some way, in one way or another. So right now what we want is the bevel modifier. So I'm just going to click this thing right here. And now you're going to see that it has beveled it. But if I go into edit mode, if I tab into edit mode, you're going to see that we don't really have that edge, do we? So this is basically not actually changing the mesh, right? However, it is just showing us as the change the mesh, right? And we can apply the bevel modifier, and then it's going to do exactly what you want. It's basically going to apply it. However, for now, I'm not going to do that. So you can just control the amount, something like that. Right now, you're going to see that the changes are way too minor. So it's not really making that much of a difference. I think something like that is good. And now we can increase the segments as well. So basically all the things which we were doing previously in the using the bevel modifier, we can do them right now as well, right? And also we can right click shade smooth this, make sure that auto smooth is turned on. It's just going to make your shading a little better. Now, if let's say you want to sort of apply these changes and actually want to have them show up as an actual mesh, what you can do is that right now you can just go ahead and click this drop down menu right here and click apply. Now do note that once you apply a modifier, you can't actually go ahead and change it because it is actually applied as a regular mesh, right? Usually we don't want to do this a lot of times. However, sometimes we do want to do this in very specific situations. We want to apply modifiers in very specific situations. However, most of the time, the only point of using modifiers instead of actually going and changing your mesh yourself is so that you can actually change you could sort of modify the properties of that modifier later on, if that makes sense, right? We can obviously change the bevel amount anytime you want. So that's the main reason why we're doing this. Right, so to sort of use modifiers in a way, I'm going to be showing you how to create a Rubik's Cube, right? Let's do a Rubik's Cube project real quick. And in that, I'm going to be showing you the bevel modifier and another modifier, which is called the array modifier. That is something similar to the bevel modifier. However, it's a little different as well, right? And we also have the mirror modifier. We're going to be using some of these modifiers in the future in this project, right? So I'm just going to be selecting the whole object and deleting it. Press Ctrl S on your keyboard, by the way. Just keep saving if you are following along. And now what I'm going to do is that firstly, I'm just going to go ahead and go to add, mesh, and then cube. So basically we want to make a Rubik's Cube, right? And so once we have this cube, what I'm going to do is that I can actually just go ahead and scale it down. However, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to press S on my keyboard. Right now, you're going to see that it doesn't snap to any axis, right? But if I hold Control on my keyboard, it's going to snap to the grid, which is exactly what I want. So I think something like that should be a good scale. I'm going to left click right there. So that's going to be one block of my Rubik's Cube, right? So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be using the array modifier to create multiple of these. But first, let me just go ahead and add a bevel modifier on this. So I'm just going to make sure that my cube is selected. Let's go to add modifier. Let's go to bevel modifier. And then this is a little too much maybe, so we can maybe just go ahead and reduce it, something like that. 0.07 seems to be good. And then I'm going to be increasing the segments to something like 5. I think 5 should be enough. Maybe something like 6 is good. Yeah, so let's do that. All right. Now we want a lot of these, right? So what we can do is either we can just copy them, right? And we can basically, the way you duplicate things in Blender 3D is by pressing Shift and D. So if I press Shift and D, you're going to see that we have another cube. Now, obviously, I want to move it specifically in the y-axis only. So I'm just going to press Y on my keyboard, and then it's going to lock to the y-axis. And so I'm just going to be placing it something like that. You're going to have to eyeball this, make sure that it is equidistant, right? And then just do it again, Shift D, Y. Now, this method is very bad, and you never want to do this unless you really want to. However, the main method that we use is going to be to use an array modifier. Now, once you have this bevel modifier, I'm just going to click this arrow right here, which is going to close it out. So it's basically just going to hide it to hide the settings, just to make things a little more efficient, not efficient, a little more organized, right? So I'm just going to go to add modifier. Let's add an array modifier. If I do that, you're going to see that we automatically have another cube, right? So what this does is that it basically creates an array of the object that you select. So if I increase the count, you're going to see that we're going to have a lot of these cubes, right? So right now I want 3 of them, and with these settings, basically what you can do is you can control the distance between them. So right now the factor x, which means the distance between each of the objects, is going to be just one. Basically it's going to be one length of the cube, right? So if I just make it something like 1.1, you're going to see that they're going to move basically 1.1 times the length of this object, right? You can also turn off relative offset, and you can turn on a constant offset. So that's something, if that's something you want, and then you can just specify the distance that you want them to be apart. But I usually don't do that. I usually just use a relative offset. And so in this scene, we just want to have a relative offset of 1, and that's perfectly fine, right? So also right now it's basically adding more objects in the x-axis, and if we don't want that, if for example we want to add more objects in the y-axis, what we can do is we can select it and make the factor x to be 0 and the factor y to be 1. So that's just gonna add the objects in the y-axis. So that's exactly what you want to do, right? Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be adding another array modifier on top of it, because if you know what a Rubik's Cube is, you would know that it is basically a 3 by 3 array, right? So it's basically a 3 by 3 by 3 3D array of cubes, right? So I'm just going to be collapsing this array modifier just to make things a little easier to see. And let's add another array modifier. This time the factor x is perfectly fine. We basically want it to be an x factor of 1 cube, right? I'm just going to be increasing the count, something like that. So there is that. And now what we can do is with that, we can actually go ahead and add another array modifier. This time we're going to be adding the array modifier, and the factor x is going to be 0. The factor z this time is going to have to be 1, because obviously we want to build it up, right? And 3. So there we have it. We have the Rubik's Cube, and it's basically ready. Right, so basically our Rubik's Cube is pretty much done. And now we have to obviously create the colors on top of it. So let's go ahead and do that. But first, make sure that your segments are fine. So also right now, you're going to see that this is essentially one object. And if I go into edit mode, you're going to see that all of these actually don't have any geometry. All of these don't exist pretty much in the edit mode. The only geometry that our edit mode is seeing is this actual cube. If I go ahead and apply these modifiers, then you're going to see that they're actually going to come as separate objects in the edit mode, right? So there's that. But I'm not going to do that because we don't really need to apply anything. Also, if you want to see through an object, the way you can do that is by pressing Alt Z on your keyboard. So that way things just become a little translucent so that you can just see through them. This is useful in a lot of cases. Obviously, you might not be aware of any cases, but right now, however, in the future, you will definitely come across cases where you would want to do that, right? Also, instead of doing that, you can also click this button right here, and it's gonna take you into that X-ray mode, right? I'm not going to be talking about these things right here. This is basically the material preview mode. This is basically the render viewport mode. So we're going to cover them later on when we're doing lighting and texturing. But for right now, our Rubik's Cube is ready. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go ahead and add the colors on top of it. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be using a very similar technique, but this time I'm going to be using a plane, right? So I'm just going to go to add. Let's go ahead and add a plane. So a plane is basically a 2D object which has a height of 0 and basically the size of whatever you want it to be. So I'm just going to be scaling it down, something like that. And that should be a good position. Something like that should be a good position for our scale. I'm just going to be moving it up, press GZ, bring it up like that. And I'm going to select it, move it up slightly. And yeah, so what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be going to the front view mode, and the way you do that is by holding Alt on your keyboard and then basically clicking your middle mouse button and then moving it, right? If I move it like that, you're going to see that we're going to go into this viewport mode. Now, if I hold my Alt mouse button, on my keyboard once again, and if I press my middle mouse button and move, you're going to see that it's going to change the viewport, change the direction of the view, right? This is basically orthographic mode also. And so I'm just going to be selecting the plane. Let's press GZ. Let's place it somewhere there, just so that it is slightly on top of slightly above the cube, but not too much. That's perfect. Now I can just go ahead and apply a bevel modifier to this as well. Bevel modifier. And so hopefully it should add curves around the edges. So it is not doing that for some reason. And the reason why it's not doing that is because the mode right now is set to edges. So if I set it to vertices, you're going to see that now it has beveled it completely. I'm just going to be reducing it. That it had basically reached the maximum level of beveling which was allowed. However, something like that should be a good amount of beveling. I am going to add segments to make it smooth. So something like 10 segments should be good. And yeah, that is a really good color. I mean, basically a very good, what do you call it? Color label, I think that's what it's called. Anyway, so I think that should be good. So now let's just go ahead and apply an array modifier to this. So I'm just going to be going to add modifier, array modifier. And this time the offset is going to be not 1. It is going to be more than 1. So let's just increase it until it looks good. Maybe 1.25, I think. Yeah, I think 1.25 seems to be perfect. So I'm going to be increasing the count to 3, and after that I'm going to be adding another array modifier to this. Array modifier, this time the factor x is going to be 0. However, the factor y is going to be 1, actually 1.25, because it was that. And increase the count to 3, and now we have the top side completed. Now what you can do is you can either just go ahead and duplicate this. So I'm just going to go here, and then you can press Shift D, right? Press GZ to go down, and hold Control so that you go exactly halfway down, because holding Control basically turns on snapping. And now I'm just going to press R to rotate it, and you can basically just rotate it just in the x-axis, something like that. However, if you want to rotate in increments, you have to hold Control. Or if you want to rotate like one specific degree, for example, in this case I want to rotate it 90 degrees, so I'm just going to press R, and then after that I'm just going to be pressing 90 on my keyboard. And if you press enter, you're going to see that it's going to apply, right? So now I'm going to just press G and hold Control so that it is moving properly. So right now I think it is applied properly. Now the reason why the shading is messed up is because basically this top part and this cube is actually in the same exact plane. So I'm going to have to move them slightly ahead, just G, Y, and then just a tad bit ahead. That should be enough. So now I'm just going to be duplicating it on other sides as well. So what I can do is that I can select this, and then I can press Shift D on my keyboard and then Z, and hold down Control so that we basically move down in increments. And so we're slightly above the cubes, that's why it's not visible. So I'm just going to be selecting this, and let's go to the side view, and let's move it slightly down, GZ, just a tad bit down. Also, if at any point you're finding it difficult to follow along with this tutorial, that's perfectly fine, because I usually make my students do this project after a few hours of Blender experience. However, this time I want you guys to sort of just dive into a little more advanced project right away, so that you guys face some difficulty in the start. However, in the long run, it's going to be very good for you, because you guys would have basically early exposure to like what real Blender projects look like. Because I could have made like a fake very cartoonish car, a very easy car, or something like that, but that wouldn't really be representative of what kind of work you're actually going to be doing when using Blender, right? So this time, and so now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be rotating both of these. So I'm going to be selecting both of these, right? I'm going to press Shift D, and now instead of moving them, I'm going to press R on my keyboard, so that it's going to rotate them, right? And I'm going to be rotating in 90 degrees. So just write 90 on your keyboard, and now press G, hold down Control, and then move it in place, something like that. And that is perfect, right? Our colors have been added, right? Now the only thing left to do is to add the materials, and we're going to be covering that in just a bit. However, right now I think we are done with the modeling. So that's essentially how you create a Rubik's Cube in Blender.